Good morning and welcome to the ABC special coverage of the 2021 Anzac Day March, live from the Shrine of Remembrance here in Melbourne. It's going to be a day of change with a limit on the participants and also changes to the order of the march due to COVID restrictions. Despite this, the march and the dawn service continue to honour those who have served. And we begin our coverage with Victorians lighting up the dawn from their driveways, and also, for a small number, a traditional service here at the shrine.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Each Anzac Day we gather to remember. We know that our remembering will not bring back those who died in the course of duty. It won't erase the pain of grieving families or sufficiently lighten the burden for those who were injured. But we remember because they've gifted us a legacy. Their legacy is the character of our nation, forged from their service.
We are all the custodians of this history and the precious memories. We bear a responsibility to those who served our nation to preserve their legacy and to commemorate it annually.
In Flanders fields the poppies grow, between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields.
Governor now laying a wreath on behalf of all the Victorians.
Stirring pictures to start the day. Well, the march is about to begin, but let's cross now to Christian Silva, our reporter on the ground, who'll be speaking to diggers and dignitaries throughout the march, and first with the all-important weather forecast.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning to everyone at home. I'll be here on the ground chatting to some of the participants in today's march and some of the other special guests who've turned out today. There's a limit of 8,000 people in today's march. However, with such beautiful weather outside, we're expecting there could be quite a few more who turn up. There's a top of 17 degrees predicted. There's a chance of a shower, but right now, PK, it's looking sensational out here.
Thank you, Christian. And it's great to be here with you on Anzac Day. As you can see, the city is bathed in sunshine for a very special march, which has had a bit of a turbulent time in the last month or so, working out how it's all going to look. For the dawn service, there were 1,400 tickets allocated. That was in early April, and so it was a much smaller service this morning. For the march, things have been changing. First it was off, then it was back. There are different COVID restrictions, of course. 8,000 registered veteran participants are allowed to march, and they will be marching along a changed route, albeit very similar when they come to their conclusion. It's been enclosed, repositioned, commencing near the Arts Centre along St Kilda Road and finishing at the Shrine of Remembrance. Restricted formation structure will ensure that COVID-safe social distancing as veterans march to the Shrine of Remembrance, pay their respects and disperse into Birdwood Avenue. And we're off. It's going to be a shorter march, as I said. We're not sure how many people will take part, and in that way, it's quite exciting to see what happens here. I'm joined in commentary this year, as always, with some very special commentators. Colonel Michelle Campbell for Army, former able seaman First Class Dennis Gist for the Navy, and the former squadron leader Chris Hudnott. Good morning to you all.
Good morning, PK. How are you?
Good morning, Paul.
And Chris, we'll start with you because it's a very big day for the RAAF. It's 100 years and a big celebration of that anniversary.
Absolutely, Paul. Important day and a very important year as the Air Force celebrates its 100th anniversary and reflects on the 350,000 Australians who have served in the RAAF since the 31st of March 1921, and of course reflecting on the almost 11,200 who've made the ultimate sacrifice.
Tell us about those who are leading the march this morning, those dignitaries from the RAF.
Yes, Paul. Air Commodore Greg Facina is the commander of Air Force Training Group. Wing Commander John Jack Absalom, Air Force Training Group also. Corporal Laura Powell, she's with the Air Force Training Group. And Aircraftsman John Mart. John is a former airline cabin manager. Also joining in the Air Force representation on the march is Andy Lappins. Andy's served 46 years in the armed services, finishing up as a warrant officer engineer, and was a helicopter crewman in Vietnam with number 9 Squadron. And then finally Max McGregor, who's the current president of the Air Force Association Victoria, former 2 Squadron bomber pilot in Vietnam, was with the Roulettes at East Sale, and finally as a VIP squadron captain, flying the Governor-General and other dignitaries around the country.
We'll talk more and more about the RAF and that marvellous anniversary later. But just to say a quick hello to Colonel Michelle Campbell. Good morning to you, Michelle.
Good morning, PK. Good to be here again after last year.
Yes, last year I woke up this morning, had almost strange memories of being in my driveway in a hard lockdown last year. So it's very different this year, and of course different to 2 years ago as well with those restrictions. And a big welcome to our coverage to Dennis Gist, who's going to be talking us through the Navy contingent. Good morning, Dennis.
A very good morning, Paul. It's great to be here on Anzac Day and to be part of the ABC team on the broadcast.
Now, they're away here with the march, and as I said, it's going to be, well, they're predicting it might take about 45 minutes, which is vastly different to recent years where the march would last for 2.5 hours. Such is the changed circumstances. But we will give a nod to those bands that come through, and that's the Haileybury Band. They're leading contemporary veterans, Michelle.
Yes, and we saw the 5th 6th Battalion leading, pipes and drums leading the march.
Fantastic. And straight into the flyover. Chris, tell us what's happening
it's
here.
4 PC Pilatus PC-21 aircraft from Central Flying School. The formation is led this morning by Flight Lieutenant Mark Karitz, and he's a qualified flying instructor and obviously a current member of the Roulettes.
Now that formation will be flying north to south along St Kilda Road, and then they'll have a sweeping left turn and then return to track east to west. So they'll do a crossover there. And also there's a bit of a change around the language of the Air Force now. From now on, the Air Force will replace the term airmen and aviators to mark its transition into its next 100 years. The Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfeld, made that announcement at the RAAF Centenary dinner on the 31st of March. So a bit of a change there, Chris, and appropriately so. There we go. It's Haileybury Girls College leading that with the banner there, and Haileybury College generally. And in behind, we can see some Navy participants, Dennis. And the HMAS Melbourne, one very close to your heart.
Yes, indeed. HMAS Melbourne, the original, of course, was the 1960s, the Majestic class aircraft carrier, HMAS Melbourne, and we've got the Royal Australian Navy veterans marching, members of that of the HMAS Melbourne cruise at the moment, with the standard bearers.
And Dennis, you were on, of course, we mentioned that the sometimes troubled past of the HMAS Melbourne. You were on the Melbourne back in 1964 when it struck the Voyager.
That's correct, Paul, yes. That was 9 o'clock at night, 2100 hours, 20 miles out to sea from the New South Wales coast. And the collision took place, and it was Australia's worst peacetime disaster when HMAS Voyager cut across the bows, and unfortunately HMAS Voyager was sunk with the loss of 82 sailors.
So we see that flyover concluding, I think, from the Roulettes. Dennis, and can I ask you, how do you reflect on that awful accident so many years later as you get older and you remember those mates that were very young and died?
Indeed, Paul, yes, it never leaves you. It stays with you all the time, and not a day goes that you don't think about it, and to think something like that could have happened. And after all, most of us are just young 17 and 18-year-olds and in a peacetime disaster, and it remains in your mind. It's indelible for the rest of your life.
Here we see some veterans coming through, Michelle.
Yes, it's from the contemporary veterans in this group. It was led by the Afghanistan banner there, and so since 2001 we've had troops in Afghanistan through Operation Slipper, and it was closely followed by the Commando Association. Interesting to note in the Australian yesterday, they cited that 9% of the Special Forces are now female. Great contribution there.
Yeah. See some in the march there as well.
Yes.
And there was a change, just to remind our viewers that there was a change last Wednesday. There were some tougher restrictions placed because of the COVID situation, and that comes from the government. Last Wednesday, they made a change where you can turn up today, use the QR code, and participate. So that was a slight change last week, and might see numbers grow even today on what might have been expected last week. And from that strong showing, I think that might be the case. We go some more marching bands through. That is might be the Old Scotch, and some more Navy coming through there, Dennis.
Yes, they look resplendent in their uniforms today, Paul, and I'm sure each and every one are very proud to be there today serving Australia and participating in the Anzac Day parade to commemorate our heroes that fell and served and are still serving.
Bathed in sunshine, and I've been to colder Anzac Day dawn services and marches. It's lovely weather there, and the crowd is starting to build on this shortened route as well, and the famous name Cerberus there featuring, as it always does on Anzac Day.
It certainly is. HMAS Cerberus is the largest naval training base in Australia and situated at Crib Point, and it was the main training base for all Royal Australian Navy, and of course the Royal Australian Navy itself was founded in the year 1911, in the July of that year.
You can see some youngsters there, Dennis. They get their chance to march. They'd be young trainee.
Yeah, just at the distance, they could be young recruits or even Naval Reserve cadets there.
Yeah.
Now we see some Armoured Corps members. The Armoured Corps Association in Victoria is led by Pat O'Halloran. And then we've got some Rhodesian ex-services in Victoria represented.
It's a strong showing there and a good turn up too, Michelle.
Yes.
It was a nerve-wracking few weeks working out what's going to be happening with the march.
Indeed, indeed. And, you know, to comply with the government restrictions of gatherings and, you know, the social distancing, this is what we're seeing today. So great turnout from everybody. And I think the weather has really turned it on for us.
There's a gentleman indicating he was looking forward to a drink after this.
As is tradition.
There'll be plenty of drinks later on. We know that there have been changed plans for some veterans who would sometimes finish their march, jump on a bus and then head to various places to spend the day together. And we're told that that's slightly different, that they might be choosing some pubs nearby. So making their way quickly there and not spending too long on the buses today.
Good turnout from the Royal Australian Regiment Association there, led there by the 7th Battalion.
Of course, you can see the famous names, and there's 8 RAR.
Yes.
The banners will all be here, and they'll be on parade this morning, just to remind us of the history of service of all of these different regiments and squadrons.
Can't quite make out that one.
Looks like the French Foreign Legion, Michelle, doesn't it?
Yes.
Mm.
Often in the march, the various different contingents made up of overseas veterans who now live in Australia. They're all represented, and it seems that they've come out again today. Wonderful to see, and to reflect on the different types of battles and those who have come at it from different places, but now on a day of peace.
Looks like we're moving into the Vietnam veterans. And they're led by the Ringwood Pipes and Drums.
Here we go. Jump the gun there on the bands. Old Scotch to come, but yes, welcome to the Ringwood Pipes and Drums. And no fewer than 3 contingents of Vietnam veterans going through the march today. And I can tell you that there are quite a few Vietnam veterans that have decided to turn up and have done for a couple of weeks. Not going to be held back by any restrictions, it seems, but certainly you can check in with the QR code and go for it today. At 8,000 number now. Royal Australian Navy, Vietnam.
That's good to see the turnout there, Paul, and of course HMAS Sydney is noted there, and HMAS Sydney served during the Vietnam War and 1965, 1972, and provided the logistical arm for the Royal Australian Navy, transporting troops, ammunition, weapons, medical supplies, etc., fuel up to Vung Tau in South Vietnam.
And no doubt they all remember that first trip over.
I don't think they'll forget it easily.
No,
Paul,
never.
no.
So Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War began with just a small commitment of 30 military advisors in 1962. And it increased over the decade to a peak of 7,672 Australian personnel following the Menzies government in April 1965 decision to upgrade its military commitment in South Vietnam security.
Now we're seeing the tunnel rats come through. Jim Marrett is leading the march there. There you can see Robin Date giving us all a big thumbs up. Great to see Butch Date there carrying the banner. And I know what it means to the tunnel rats to be here. And they'll be off to Port Melbourne, I'm told, for a few beers later on today. Or let's go down to Christian Silver.
I'm joined now by Neil Taylor. He's the CEO of the RACV. Neil, what can you tell us about what the RACV's done to help veterans today?
It's one of the lovely things the organisation's done for a great many years. Is every year we have the privilege of hosting an event here, and a number of us get the opportunity to drive some of the veterans who serve the country so admirably over so many conflicts. So it's a great pleasure to be able to do that every year.
And tell us, how did you spend your morning?
This morning, Brooke and I got up and we drove Robert Jevons, who was a Korean veteran and fought on a frigate, HMAS Condamine, from 1950 to 1953, and he's just sitting over there with his daughter Anne.
Fantastic. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, you might have noticed that the cars that are usually on the march route aren't here, and that's because of COVID restrictions, Michelle, but great to see the RACV doing its bit and getting people to the march so that they can watch at least. Chris,
there's a great banner there,
yes.
Paul, we just saw on the screen, and some of my colleagues on the march today, and that's excellent.
A few friendly faces there.
A few well-known friendly faces, and we're all heading off to the city for lunch and after the march today.
Every year, for those viewers who need reminding, Chris sits with us and provides his special commentary, and I can feel just a little piece of him wants to be out there on the march. So, but he's providing his services to you, the ABC.
And I think we saw on screen before David Grierson. Legacy and the Shrine, and a lifetime of service. So Scots College Pipes and Drums.
I think they're a regular participant, aren't they, Michelle, in the Anzac Day March?
Very much so, yes. And
every year.
The pipes and drums, they're from years 5 to 12, represented across the boys from such a young age. And we hear a lot of bands on today, and the 5th 6th Battalion of the Royal Victoria Regiment led the bands earlier today, and their origins go back to 1899 with the Scottish Victorian Regiment. So hence they wear the kilts as well today, so honouring that tradition. And there we see, what is that one?
That's
the 161 Recce.
That's an army unit in Vietnam.
Yes. Hence the Blue Beret.
Yes, they operated for quite some time. Blue Berets.
If you're just tuning in, you're watching the Anzac Day March from the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. There you can see the magnificent skyline. Bathed in sunshine this morning.
Absolutely.
A smaller march than normal, but those images no less powerful than they are every year on this magnificent day, recognising Australia's service of history. Let's hear from Christian Silver.
I'm joined now by Alf Abbott, one of the veterans here at today's event. Alf, tell us, what does Anzac Day mean to you?
It was the end of all hostilities, and everybody got, well, those of us that were left got the chance to come back home. And it's a day of remembering mates that have gone, and well, I'm the only one left that I know of from my unit, which was only a small crowd, 30-odd fellas in a supply unit, but as far as I know, I'm the only one left.
Alf Abbott, Great to have him here today. Yes, due to those slight changes in the way the march is being held, the World War II veterans who would otherwise be riding in the cars, they're being treated as dignitaries and given the best seats in the house to watch the march and to remember those who have gone. And Alf Abbott saying that he's the last of his mates still with us today.
I think as we progress through the march, PK, we started with the contemporaries and now we're moving backwards in time. And so, yes, I think we'll see a few more descendants coming forward.
And Dennis, we saw the HMAS Quick, was it? That went
yes, HMAS Quick match went through there, and of course the HMAS Canberra, which was a county class vessel of 10,000 tonnes, and that was lost on the 9th of August in battle off Sabo Island, and with the Shropshire, which was a Royal Navy, HMAS Shropshire became from the Royal Navy as a replacement to us, and later saw battle in Leyte Gulf in New Guinea, Borneo.
And there we see more veterans coming along, and I'm glad to see some of them have their broad brim hats because it is sunny outside and we were predicted rain, so...
It was supposed to be wet, was it?
It was.
No, it's a beautiful day, bright
it
sunshine.
Is gorgeous.
Not hot, but lovely, and perfect for marching conditions. And,
Paul, if I may mention, it's interesting. If I may mention about the HMAS Canberra, it was, as you know, lost in battle, as I mentioned, but the United States military command later commissioned one of their cruisers, the USS Canberra, and visited Melbourne. I think that was back in late 50s or early 60s. So it was a great recognition by the United States military to do so.
Indeed. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Dennis Gist there, able seaman, first class. Colonel Michelle Campbell is here with her expertise in the Army and giving us those special comments about the Army groups that you're seeing in the march, and the former squadron leader Chris Hudner on his big day for the RAAF on its 100th anniversary. And there's some famous banners coming through, led by the Box Hill City Band, leading the way, and all of the bands doing great work today.
A lot of Air Force banners about to come on the screen, I think, Paul.
Yes.
Representing various airmen who served in the Second World War.
It's good to see the young kids there, learning all about commemoration right from an early age. And certainly the Shrine has a good school educational program that I'm sure most school kids these days have gone through.
Indeed, and in the several years that I've been commentating this march, I've seen it change along the way. And of course, as we see the changing nature of veterans who take to the march, but the banners will stay, won't they?
Absolutely.
And why do you think it's important for those banners to be represented every year?
I think it's your history on a banner. It fills pride, and that sort of stems back in history. Once upon a time, it was, really to signal where the commanding officer was and which unit was what. So it was from a practical reason. But as most things that are traditional, they stem from that practicality. And here we are today with great traditions, and we can see all the units marching along.
Chris, some more very proud members and descendants of the RAAF.
Yes, Paul, and I did see the 460 Squadron banner just briefly before. This was one of the longest and largest, longest serving and largest squadrons in Bomber Command in Europe. And they suffered terrible losses with more than 1,000 crew killed. And effectively, it means that the squadron was effectively wiped out about 5 times over. So a lot of fond memories. There it is, 460 Squadron and 458 Squadron just in front.
And that there you see a familiar scene on the march every Anzac Day. Family or friends, carers indeed, helping the veterans make the walk up that slight rise. And they're looking right up at the Shrine of Remembrance, one of the great features of the Melbourne skyline. Indeed, a magnificent museum in itself. I tell you what I like about the banners is just seeing the names of the places where those battles were waged. It's visceral, and it takes you straight back to anything that you know about those places.
It's interesting to see some of those places, you know, from World War I to right through to contemporary, you know, such as Timor. We've had presence there in each of the theatres.
It tells a great story, Michelle and Paul, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. It does, and a special word, Dennis, perhaps for the Rands.
Yeah, absolutely. Where would we be without them in the Royal Australian Navy? Do you know they were formed during World War II in 1941 and looked after communications, medical services, transport and many other duties in the Royal Australian Navy.
And Dennis, in fact, I'd be nowhere without the Rands because, as I mentioned every year, my parents met in the Navy.
Is that right, Paul?
Well, they were both in the Navy at that time,
fraternisation.
And I send my best wishes to Mum and Dad, who always love catching up with their old friends.
A very nautical couple.
That's right. There's the Shropshire you mentioned before, and the Canberra banner as well.
Yes, they served with distinction, Paul, around Sabo Island, in quite a bit of action against the Imperial Japanese. Sabo Island, Leyte Gulf, and in New Guinea.
I'll tell you what, I'm very impressed with the crowd this morning.
It's a valiant turnout, isn't it?
It is, and they're very animated. It's, dare I say, it's more a dynamic march this year, it seems, because of the shortened distance. So get your cheers in and get your applause in while you can. And big waves. The veterans love seeing, well, particularly the youngsters as well, turning up and giving them due recognition, and that's what it's about, recognition. And we've discussed, by the way, previously, the merit of carrying photographs. For the record, I'm a fan of it. Not everyone is.
Well, it keeps the memory of your family alive, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like it. I like seeing those faces, even if only in print.
And so in World War II, as we're in this contingent now, by the end of the war, almost 1 million Australians had served in the armed forces and military units that primarily in the European Theatre, North African Campaign and the Southwest Pacific Theatre. In addition, as we all know, Australia came under attack for the first time in its post-colonial history up in Darwin. So casualties for World War II, 27,073 were killed and 23,477 wounded. More suffered from tropical disease, hunger and harsh conditions in captivity. And over 21,000 Australian prisoners were taken by the Japanese and only 14,000 survived.
If I could just add to that, Michelle, interesting at the repatriation hospital out at Heidelberg from the late 1940s through the 1950s was virtually full of veterans there being treated for their injuries and war wounds.
It's still there, the structure, isn't it?
Yes, it's still there, Paul.
There we are, the Darwin Fortress.
A lot of medals, a lot of smiles, and the terrific banners that come through too to remind us all of that important part of Australian history. I think that's our youngest participant in the march this morning.
I think it looks like he's asleep or she's asleep there too.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, those dulcet tones of the bands, putting the young ones to sleep.
Very safe in the arms of Dad, I'm assuming.
Very good. And it was a shorter march this year. It was this side of Flinders Street, it started. So normally the march, you'd form up in all the streets in the CBD, but due to the construction work at Flinders Street, but also just to deconflict from the football, foot traffic, to comply with government COVID restrictions, we've started at this side of Flinders Street Station. So a lot of the veterans haven't had that long march, which by the time you got to the shrine, it is quite a long way.
It is. I think I can sense some of those marching just making it last as well and enjoying the moment at the moment. It's the 42nd Infantry Battalion with all of those famous place names. Of course, we should mention there have been some criticism and comparisons with what's happening at the football with such a big crowd and different restrictions on Anzac Day March as well. And the RSL has fielded those criticisms too, but points out that the two events are not the same and there are different restrictions placed on the march and due to the age of some of the participants as well. But perhaps that's a debate to be had later on.
Yeah, and I think, the march being an open air, they've had to sort of cordon it off, whereas at the football you've got sort of very strict, fencing that you can, all the bays, you can't flick between many of them. So. And
there are differences between a seated arrangement and a standing arrangement, and some of them make you shake your head, but that's the time we're in. And it's great that the march is going ahead. That's the great positive.
We just saw a couple of female veterans there standing on the side, clapping the World War II contingents going through. Currently, ADF women make up 20% of the military. The RAF leading the way with 25%, Navy 22%, and Army 15%. And those percentages have increased over the last decade.
Do those statistics please you, Michelle, or still got more to do in that area?
Well, I joined 32 years ago, and it certainly wasn't that percentage. But now women are in combat roles, and really in the last decade we've had a focus on that. We have 411 women in combat roles in infantry, artillery and armoured units for Army.
They've come a long way, Michelle, haven't they? I think the Royal Australian Navy and the Army and the Air Force provide wonderful futures, careers for Australians, young Australians in particular, looking for a job. I think the military can offer that to them today. Great friendship.
And we are the ADF as the most integrated fighting forces. One of the leaders in the world. So
great to see some youngsters in their school uniforms carrying the banners that represents their family members, I assume, and that was a nice touch.
A number of schools have adopted the old battalions just to sort of keep that memory alive and research it as part of the school program. So that's really good too.
It's good, yeah. Absolutely essential. That's part of the curriculum.
Nurses watching here this morning, Michelle, Paul and listeners, that viewers I should say, when I remember my earliest time was about 1952 with my family standing outside Melbourne Town Hall, and there were endless streams of thousands and thousands of returned veterans, and particularly the light horsemen from the World War I on their horses in uniform, proudly moving down Swanston Street. It's incredible to think that so many have now left us, but they're not being forgotten.
Even in the last 10 years, Dennis, you notice that children who are marching with their grandparents, if those youngsters are lucky enough to have veterans.
Yeah, I certainly had great-grandparents World War I, grandparents in World War II. So yes, hearing all the stories from those generations that have since passed on. And here we are from the 7th Division, which were part of the 2nd AIF 1st Corps. And And there's a young lady with her medals on the left side.
It's a great effort by all those involved, isn't it? And many come from long distances to be here today at the Shrine of Remembrance and participate in the Anzac Day parade and service.
And you've come all the way from the Mornington Peninsula, Dennis. So
I think I need. Thank you, thanks, Michelle. I needed a fast tinny to get up here this morning, but stayed overnight, so it made it a lot easier.
Oh, terrific!
Thank you.
And then the 8th Australian Infantry Battalion, and there's carrying the medals of an ancestor, and again Timor features again. Followed by the 9th Division. As I mentioned, the 2nd AIF in the Second World War had 2 corps and many, many divisions. You could go on and on and on about all the different units and whatnot, but we're just here to say thank you for your service.
More photographs coming through. Neatly placed around the neck.
Easy way to carry it.
Yes. Yes, well done. I do like that. We've had this discussion before about the photographs. I think it's a strong feature.
Yeah. So from 1942 to early 1944, Australian forces played a key role in the Pacific War, making up the majority of Allied strength throughout much of the fighting in Southwest Pacific Theatre. While the military was largely regarded to subsidiary fronts from mid-44, it continued offensive operations against the Japanese until the war ended.
It's interesting too, Michelle, Paul, the attacks that took place in World War II on Darwin, that in recent years the whole story seems to be coming out that there were more attacks on Darwin and the port and sinking of ships and loss of life than what we knew before. So it's great for us all to know the truth and to remember those not only overseas but in Australia that fell in the fighting during World War II.
Why do you think it's taken so long, Dennis, to recognise the enormity of that?
I guess it would be secrecy and the Secrecy Act of some kind.
Yeah.
Paul, I'd imagine that they didn't want to panic people during World War II that there was such severe bombing taking place, and I guess the war was over and it got put away on a shelf until recent times.
Some famous names there, Michelle.
Yes, Tobruk, Finschhafen, El Alamein.
Big nod to the Cooey-Rupp Secondary College. Come from Gippsland to take their part in the marches they usually do.
A very fine turnout too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they do a great job. The teenagers from Cooey-Rupp.
I've just noticed this morning the great representation made by bands, and the martial music that they're playing has been really wonderful.
Looks like we have descendants walking and more photos being held. Obviously a loved one. And there's a little digger bear that a young girl is carrying. Yes. Oops. And that's a feature of the march. We include our allies and other countries that have served.
Let's go down to Christians.
Okay.
Down to Christian. Christian silver.
I'm here with John Silver. John, tell me, what does Anzac Day mean to you, and what are some of the memories that come back to you on a day like this?
Well, it's the tradition of the whole thing, going back over generations, and importantly, to be here with my mates today and to catch up with them, blow the froth off a couple and just share some stories.
Fantastic. John, last year you weren't able to do this commemoration. Does it feel extra special to be out here today on a perfect day as well in Melbourne?
Yes, it does feel extra special. It's a return to what it used to be, to a part. It's just a shame that the government saw fit to reduce the numbers. But last year we were on the balcony with the white ensign flying and at the dawn service. And it was a very nice celebration too.
Well, it sounds like you'll have a fantastic day. John, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Christian as well, doing a great job there, out and about and getting us those interviews. And what a scene it is, and the beautiful rich grass, which always looks good, but hasn't done this for 2 years. Because last year we were all in our driveways and in hard lockdown in Melbourne, and the RSL's done a great job to put on this event today, even when it seemed unlikely only a couple of months ago. The Salvation Army coming through on Anzac Day, and if you're just joining us, our special commentators Michelle Campbell and also Dennis Gist at the moment, and Chris Hudnam from the RAAF on a very special day for the RAF, celebrating 100 years and signalling the beginning of another 100 years.
Yes, well, that'll lead into the air show towards the end of this year in November. It was supposed to be in February, the usual air show, but every 2 years, but due to COVID, it's just been postponed to November.
And there you go, some of the most famous names of all, and the Light Horse Regiment being recognised, and also the 6th Australian Infantry Battalion.
Moving on to World War I. So just a few stats for you. The Commonwealth Census of 1911 counted 4,455,005 people living in Australia. But of course back then, unfortunately, the Aboriginal Australians were not included in this census. Victorians' population at 1914 was 1,430,000 people. You'd be, it's sort of, when you read this stat, you sort of go, wow, 416,809 Australians enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force.
Yeah.
That's just extraordinary. That's 38% of the Australian male population between the ages of 18 to 44.
Enormous contribution, Michelle, isn't it?
It is. Those numbers are startling, and I feel like in the last few years, as we've gone through the different anniversaries of 100-year anniversaries of different battles and stages of World War I feel like the history lessons have been very, very good and hit the mark with young people, but with all Australians, as we've learnt more and more about World War I. And you can see those names on the banner too. I note the 14th was there. Of course, some of them are precursors to very, very famous battalions that served in World War II. So recognitions going through the generations there. Of course, the 2nd, 14th, we saw that banner earlier.
They've become legendary. Paul had a day for their service.
They have in different areas of war, and Kokoda included.
So 320,000 members of the AIF in and so almost 60,000 were killed in action or died of wounds overseas. And so really that was the genesis for a number of the war memorials that you see in every town, every country town, every suburb, and indeed the shrine. And we didn't have a practice. So back then we didn't
Turned veteran Don Bergman. Don, tell us, what does Anzac Day mean to you?
It means remembering all the servicemen from the early days of Australia, and also you meet up with all your friends, and hopefully that you can keep meeting them from the, because it's really the only time that you can meet some of your friends.
And how do you feel seeing such large crowds over the years turning out for Anzac Day to honour those who served their country?
Yeah, it's a great honour to be able to wear medals that you've earned, and to show and to meet up with people that have similar medals and have done similar activities or similar service.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Don.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you to Christian Silver there, our reporter out on the ground. And such is the nature of the march this year that we are nearing an end. A march that usually goes for 2.5 hours has gone by very quickly indeed, some 45, 50 minutes. And there you can see, that's the view that the marchers have had. And it's lovely to see too, looking up at the Shrine of Remembrance.
Isn't it just marvellous, Paul, to have a Shrine of Remembrance like this where we can remember and commemorate each year? And I think this was built back in the 1920s during that Depression period.
Indeed, indeed. And it was actually partly funded by money raised by public subscription, £160,000, which represented 64% of the cost to build the Shrine of Remembrance.
A great effort at that time when you consider all things, Michelle and Paul. And
yes,
may I mention that one of the trustees, the chairperson of the Shrine of Trustees, is Captain Royal Australian Navy Captain retired Steve Bowater, who's doing a fine job there.
Indeed.
The Caulfield South Primary School, the band there going through, and they do a great job. And I'm not sure how the kids feel about not doing about 4 laps like they usually do.
They usually just go round and round, and good on them every year.
I suppose there's a lot of pressure on that once only performance, but they look up for it.
And terrific uniforms as well.
Yeah, they do a terrific job.
Great.
We're just having just a couple of technical issues this morning, but the march is proceeding, and so are we, with our coverage of Anzac Day and the march up to the Shrine of Remembrance. Of course, a full day of commemorations right across the city. And as we see all of those marching bands come through, it's worth noting that I'm hearing there's been bumper crowds, notwithstanding COVID restrictions, at local RSLs and in different places right across the city and the state. And people still getting out in their driveways this morning, learning from last year that that's a really valid and powerful way to do it as well. When you stand out there on your driveway and look across and up and down the street, people are standing there with candles, and at least one person's put the radio on and
live stream. On YouTube.
Oh, Michelle, you're way ahead of me.
Oh, yes, that's what we did at our street this morning.
Candle and wireless down my way.
Tin
well, that's just us. Lots of medals and terrific marching this morning, and lots of smiles in the crowd. Quite a big crowd turning up.
Yes.
An hour before the march, we just weren't sure how this was all going to go off this morning. The planning has been frantic, but the RSL has done a terrific job to stage this march as it has.
And here we have, I think these are the March Marshals. And so they've been instrumental in executing this march today. A lot of planning, months of planning and replanning as and when the restrictions and government advice are changed. And so hats off to all those marshals that have stuck with it and produced such a beautiful march today. The Chief Marshal is Colonel Jason Cook, his deputy Stretch Jarvis, Bruce Jarvis, but everyone knows him as Stretch, and they've done a fantastic job of orchestrating this order of march down from our usual sort of 3 hours down to an hour and a half, and sort of fit it all in. And the Scouts have really supported us over the years, carrying the banners for all the different units across the ages. And so they're fantastic, and they usually get here at Dark 100 to sort of, help with all the banners and unravelling them, and getting the right people to carry the heavier ones, and so on and so forth. So thanks very much.
Yeah, it's great to recognise the Scouts. We perhaps don't mention them as often as we can.
And very important too, Paul and Michelle, for our youth to be learning and participating in the Anzac Day Parade, which will carry them forward into the years.
Yeah, great experience for everyone. And that's the end of the march. And let's just take a break now and have some reflection with this really important story.
For over 100 years, we have set aside Anzac Day to give thanks to those who have served and to those who have died serving our country. We honour the memory of those no longer with us and pay our respects to those whose sacrifice helped secure our way of life. And we reflect on the collective impact of those individuals, the Anzac legacy, and what it means to us today. But that legacy wasn't etched into stone at Anzac Cove. It has and must continue to evolve. It's important that we think of the Anzac legacy in modern terms as well, in the context of service in places like Somalia, Namibia, East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan, in the context of our modern veterans and their needs, recognising their service and contributions, and for some, the scars they bear because of it. Recognising too the critical role played by their loved ones, and understanding that while they didn't march in parades or receive medals, parents, husbands and wives, partners and children are also part of the Anzac legacy. Each story is unique, but these individual stories, collectively, are the Anzac legacy. As we consider how that legacy has evolved, Linda and I welcomed some veterans and their families to Government House recently to hear their stories and to share ours.
When you're in the military, there's the concept very much of service before self. People kind of taking care of everyone else, but not necessarily taking care of themselves.
Service in the military is not an ordinary job. There is no other field of employment where someone can be ordered to their death.
Everyone that signs up to serve our country, everyone that wears a uniform in the Australian Defence Force makes a sacrifice.
Being the partner of a veteran is a constant sacrifice.
Then I did 2 tours of Afghanistan, and I was wounded in action in Afghanistan in 2010 and then subsequently medically discharged from the Army in 2012.
My second tour of Timor in 2004, I was part of an aeromedical evacuation team delivering aid in East Timor, and I was involved in a serious helicopter crash. And I don't know why, but I made a conscious decision that I would be a survivor of what had happened to me and not a victim.
By the time I became a commanding officer, in one RER we had 3 small children, and that was when I deployed to Somalia during that period.
Get them all home safe. Will do, son.
I have never, ever seen a group of men so excited, because it was the first deployment, more or less, since Vietnam. And I can remember it so clearly, him walking down the path to catch the ferry. And that was it. And then it was, okay, I've got 3 kids and a whole, group of women, and we just rallied. Anyway, we started a magazine to give out information, and we sent that to parents as well. And it was called SOS, Spouses of Somalia.
Any marriage is hard and takes a lot of compromise and negotiation, but I think when it keeps being, you've got that upheaval and you've got to constantly come and go from that and reintegrate.
That person has sacrificed a part of their life so you could do your job's a huge thing. Absolutely brought us closer together, and I couldn't have done what I'd done without her by my side.
There's always this kind of exterior that you have to show to the
population that you are proud of what they're doing, are proud of where they are, but there is always a struggle behind the scenes.
For him, it was really difficult coming home and settling back into the normal pace of life and trying to prioritise and apply effort to things that seemed so mundane.
I have great admiration for partners of people in the Defence Force and the support that they bring, and they need support. Like, you hear stories from women where sometimes their husband might wake up in the middle of the night and start attacking them because they've had a bad dream. So that's a really hard thing to live with for the whole family.
You know, I personally kind of struggled with, you know, when I came back was am I worthy of marching on Anzac Day?
Australian men and women have continued to step up and say, I will do what is necessary to defend Australia and her interests.
Defence was, well, it was his whole life, and I guess it became my whole life, and particularly during Somalia.
Linda's been through the ups and downs, particularly in the last 10 years when we've lost soldiers in operations, and stood by me at funerals and at airstrips when people return and engage with families, and you know, she's been in the trenches doing that as much as anyone in uniform has been.
The number one precursor for a veteran becoming homeless or committing suicide is actually family breakdown. So everything we do to invest in supporting the family is, you know, supporting veterans as well.
It'll be a healing that goes on for the rest of your life. But we've got to look after them.
To the families and loved ones of serving men and women or veterans, on behalf of all Australians, thank you. To those in uniform who have served, know your nation is forever grateful and that we will support you. To the memory of those no longer with us, lest we forget.
As is customary, that's the Anzac Day message from the Governor-General of Australia, His Excellency, the Honourable David Hurley. That is the magnificent scene this morning, the Shrine of Remembrance. It's been a terrific 2021 Anzac Day march. Commemorations are ongoing. A big crowd has turned out, big being a relative term because there have been restrictions on numbers, of course. It was a much smaller dawn service this morning at the Shrine of Remembrance, but right across the state, people have been recognising in their own way Anzac Day, including the people standing out the front of their houses and having dawn services locally as well. And that's all worked wonderfully well, we're told, right across the state. The march has gone off well here under bright sunshine. As I said, people turning out and giving bright rounds of applause. And those are the official proceedings ongoing at the moment. It's a big year for the Air Force. 100 years of Air Force in Australia. Continuing on with that, let's take a brief overview now. The contribution the RAF have come to make in the last century.
After World War I, the British offered 120 aircraft to any Dominion wanting to start their own Air Force. Australia answered.
And without that gift, we would not be today celebrating the anniversary of the Royal Australian Air Force.
On March the 31st, 1921, with a budget of £500, 149 people and 153 aircraft, the Australian Air Force was born.
Empire pilots hurled into the fray the fastest, fiercest warplanes in the world. Australia also thrills with pride at the miraculous achievements of both men and machines.
For 100 years, the Royal Australian Air Force has protected Australia and the world.
Well, you all know the target. It's Berlin, 0 hour is 03:15.
Bomber Command's objective was to destroy Germany's resolve through relentless aerial bombing. Aircrew had just a 1 in 4 chance of surviving their tour of duty.
They've carried out surveillance and intelligence operations throughout the world, including the Korean War, Vietnam and Afghanistan.
With scores 2-1, Vector 170, Angels 36.
From those early beginnings, today the Air Force has more than 500 members on active service each day. supporting peacekeeping missions, disaster relief, and providing humanitarian aid both at home and overseas.
To be able to afford the opportunity to look after our people, the Australian public, it's a wonderful privilege.
Travelling around the world, supporting our operations, airdrop, really moving things where they need to go.
With technical advancements in flight, the next frontier will take the Air Force to the stars.
It's not just air power anymore, it's space power.
RAAF and our special commentators this morning, Michelle Campbell, Dennis Gist, and the former squadron leader, Chris Hudnett, who's got a big smile on his face and is full of pride, as always, but increasingly so. Watching what's happening here this morning, Chris, 100 years, what does it mean?
Oh, very significant, Paul. As I mentioned before, over the last 100 years, we've had more than 350,000 Australians have served. And in fact, from a very shaky beginning, the RAAF became the world's second Air Force after the RAF was formed in 1918. An interesting point is that Air Marshal Sir Richard Williams, who we saw just a little while ago, noted the 1st of April 1918 for the formation of the RAF. But when it became the RAAF's turn for formation, he decided that rather than go with the 1st of April and the significance of that particular date, he would choose the 31st of March 1921,
yes,
due to his concern about maybe nasty people referring to Air Force personnel as being April Fools. So despite his tenacious personality, maybe he still had a sense of humour at the time.
Good on him.
That wasn't a reflection of some sort of rivalry within the military, is it?
Yeah.
Healthy rivalry.
And Chris, tell us about your experiences and what you think about on Anzac Day when you remember your time.
Yes, I think particularly a group of Vietnam veterans get together every year on Anzac Day, and of course on Vietnam Veterans Day as well, but particularly Anzac Day, and we get together and reflect on the times that we had in the service over many years. In fact, we served, our particular group served for several years, beginning with 35 Squadron deployment, as it was then, and then 9 Squadron and 2 Squadron, and a whole bunch of people acting in other capacities, such as forward air controllers and other avenues of service. So it's a very special day when we all get together and think back on those times.
And do you miss being in the air and flying, or do you miss the friendships?
I miss the friendships, and of course miss being in the air. In fact, I've taken up flying model aeroplanes in my
Have you?
In my retirement, which is yes, it started off to be a bit of a hobby, now turned into an obsession. So I've got to watch myself.
As long as you're enjoying yourself.
That's the main thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, continuing our celebration of the RAAF century, let's look at some of the work that goes into planning a fly past, just like the one here today that you saw a little earlier, just at the start of the march, or over the skies of Canberra and at Government House a few weeks ago.
The 31st of March involves a flight past over Canberra with some 60-odd aeroplanes conducting the flight past. It represents the capability of current air assets. It also commemorates the past aircraft of the Royal Australian Air Force. I'm the formation lead from the Hercules contingent. There's 4 aircraft today. It's a box formation with myself in lead. The actual position you're seeing in the photo today is slightly further aft. For the air show, that it doesn't visually appeal to ground-based viewers. So we're looking to move the formation position into a more echelon-based position, which is further out. We hope to practice a number of various items. First and foremost is practicing the formation positions specifically. It's a bit different to what we would normally fly, so we're targeting what we're looking to fly past on the day. We also practice a number of contingencies just in case the weather's poor. Obviously our timeline for Government House is fairly strict, and we're looking to practice the timeline delivery so we don't turn up early or late.
So I'm from Alice Springs originally. I was about 13, 14. Every year I would harass the recruiters that would come down from Darwin and said I wanted to be a pilot. My role on the day is that I'm going to be flying on board one of the C-130J aircraft involved in the formation. There's a fair bit of teamwork that goes on with all of us because we have the crew, so the pilots and the load masters, and we need to all work together to get the mission complete.
So Loadmaster looks after the weight and balance of the aircraft. We load the aircraft, also look after passengers when we're moving from A to B. We can do other roles, airborne operations, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief as well. My role on the day will be ensuring that the aircraft is balanced correctly. And also when we fly in formation in the 4 aircraft, I'll be assisting the pilots to make sure that we don't get close to other aircraft. Looking outside the windows, the paratroop doors that we have on the aircraft, and just maintaining that communication.
Whenever you put 60 aeroplanes in the sky, separating those aeroplanes from each other obviously presents a fairly significant challenge. If it's a nice clear day, that challenge is reduced. Yeah, if the weather's bad, you can imagine trying to separate 60 aeroplanes becomes highly complicated.
I've been in the Air Force for 22 years now. That's over a fifth of the 100 years, and so to be around for the Centenary I think is really quite nice, and to be involved with the celebrations is also a pretty nice way to help celebrate.
It's just a great day in the office. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that, the Australian Air Force has never seen and is unlikely to see for a long time ahead. So it's an opportunity that, I'm very proud to be a part of.
Great story there, and a great recognition of the RAAF, and love the rock music as well, Chris. They tell me you've never had so many sign up. This is in America after the movie Top Gun. But of course, that wasn't reality. The reality is the one you've just seen.
Yes, and Paul, I think, bearing in mind that the RAAF was formed from the Australian Flying Corps in World War I, using very flimsy aircraft made from wood and linen, to the sophisticated, very sophisticated aircraft and equipment we've just seen on the screens, and operating in not only in the air environment but increasingly in the cyber and space domains. So the Air Force has come a very, very long way in the last 100 years.
Thanks for joining us this morning on the ABC for our special coverage of the 2021 Anzac Day March up to the Shrine of Remembrance, and as you can see, they're still having some remembrance here, and the special part of the post-march process that they hold, the RSL, going through its formalities, and it's been a beautiful morning here. Quite a large and vibrant crowd, although much changed from previous years. But everyone who's here has enjoyed the march this morning, as we see those soldiers giving a moment of reflection.
And these are representatives from the Australia's Federation Guard, which is a tri-service ceremonial unit that was obviously set up in 2000 to support the Federation celebrations back then. They've represented the ADF and Australia around the world, including providing a guard back in Buckingham Palace back in 2000.
Gee, that's wonderful, Michelle, isn't it?
Precision drill, yes.
I was just thinking a moment ago when Chris was mentioning about the Royal Australian Air Force that in World War II, Australia was manufacturing and producing aircraft, in particular the Wirraways, Chris.
Yes, that's quite correct, Dennis. And I think at the outbreak of World War II, the RAAF was only established with about 3,500 men and 246 obsolete aircraft. And at the end of the war, over 173,000 men operating over 5,600 aircraft in 73 squadrons. So a dramatic change.
Yeah, we've just seen the wreath laying by the State President of the RSL, Dr. Robert Webster.
Let's take time to have a look and commemorate the servicemen laid to rest at Adelaide Cemetery in France, including Australia's unknown soldier who represents the loss of many at the Australian War Memorial's Hall of Memory.
In February 1917, Jack O'Brien, a young engineer's assistant from Fremantle in Western Australia, enlisted in the AIF. In April 1918, Jack joined the 48th Battalion in France. By the time Jack arrived on the Western Front, Australia's dead already numbered in the tens of thousands, amongst many more from Britain and her allies, and plans for what would become the Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemeteries were already well underway. Only a few months after his arrival in France on the 8th of August 1918, he had been mortally wounded in action, suffering injuries to his chest and spine. Jack died the next day at the 8th Field Ambulance dressing station and was buried 2 miles west of Villers-Bretonneux. Jack's remains were exhumed from White Chateau Cemetery and moved to the larger Adelaide Cemetery. His family were notified, and in 1921, Jack's mother paid for the creation of a wreath of silk flowers, which were laid on his grave on her behalf. The photograph of the grave which was sent to her may have been her only connection to his final resting place. Only one man's remains have been moved from Adelaide Cemetery since it was complete. In 1993, they were disinterred and entombed as Australia's unknown soldier in the Hall of Memory at the Australian War Memorial. One man to represent the loss of so many tens of thousands. The waves of grief that were felt across the nation in the wake of the First World War have since subsided, but Australians still visit the cemeteries on the Western Front. Some have family connections, others an interest in military history. Many who visit are moved by the scale of loss created by the war. Each individual headstone remains a tangible reminder of a family cast into grief. The inscription on Jack O'Brien's headstone reads simply, "God in His mercy knows best, in loving memory."
Yes, the commemorative service has begun here in Melbourne following a much changed but terrific Anzac Day march here in Melbourne. Those scenes are the dignitaries laying wreaths in front of the flame, Michelle,
Yeah.
and this is a much more sombre part of today's ceremonies.
And this is the eternal flame, so that flame never goes out. What we've had previously, we had the 3 services placed there, wreaths there. We've also had what we call the headquarter group, comprising of Shrine trustees and the Lord Mayor and a few others, and more wreaths are about to be laid.
Yes, and I can tell you that that is a group of dignitaries, including representatives from the Victorian government.
Acting Premier.
That's right, the acting Premier, of course, Daniel Andrews, is still hasn't returned to work following his fall, but the acting Premier on hand there for the government. And as I was about to say, I can tell you, the word is that there'll be some relief after this all goes off well, and it is going well today on Anzac Day, because there's much consternation of how this is going to look with different COVID restrictions.
The RSL have done a marvellous job in the logistics and planning of this, Paul, haven't they?
They have, and they've copped some flack along the way too, because at one point they were saying that the march wouldn't go ahead. and constant comparisons with what else is happening. But these are the COVID times we're in, where you can compare something that's happening across the street with what's being restricted of you. But they're working within the restrictions provided, and those changes last week to allow people to turn up by using the QR code, I think was a very smart one.
It sure was. Yeah.
And that must have freed up people to turn up on the day.
And thankfully a glorious sunny day for it too, Paul.
Terrific.
I can't believe the weather. Where's that rain?
Supposed to
That'll
be
come
rain,
with the footy,
wasn't it?
I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Usually trench coat weather, but no, it's a sparkling day in Melbourne. As we reflect on today's proceedings, let's step back to 1915 as the first Royal Australian Naval bridging train was formed, destined to sail for overseas servicing at the Western Front. Take a look.
A little-known Australian unit, the first Royal Australian Naval bridging train, was formed in February 1915 and sailed for overseas service in June with a strength of 300 men, mostly naval reservists, and more than 400 horses. En route to the Western Front, their plans were changed and the unit was instead destined for Gallipoli. The naval bridging train, minus their horses, landed under fire at Suvla on 7 August in support of a British offensive. Once ashore, their skills were in high demand. Their first major task was to build a pier. Casualties at Suvla were mounting quickly and lifeboats could not get within 100 yards of the shore. The naval bridging train swung into action, rowing pontoons ashore. They constructed a pier within 20 minutes. It was in use just 5 minutes later. Soon their role expanded to include a wide range of activities, from distributing stores and erecting dugouts and cookhouses. One of their most vital tasks was managing the supply of water to troops on shore, life-saving work in a scorching summer. The men constructed a pipeline supported by trestles, and the water was eagerly awaited by troops on shore. Based at what was known as Kangaroo Beach, the men were subject to shelling and aerial bombardment. The unit was led by 32-year-old Lieutenant Commander Leighton Bracegirdle, a career military man who had served in the Boxer Rebellion and the Boer War, and had been part of the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force in German New Guinea in 1914. As summer gave way to autumn and winter approached, storms engulfed Gallipoli, which made working and living even more challenging. Fierce gales smashed boats onto rocks, sickness rose in the unit, and a rising swell even threatened to overwhelm the commanding officer's dugout. In December, the naval bridging train had an important role to play in ensuring the smooth evacuation of British troops from Suvla. The men worked day and night constructing piers, assembling and disassembling huts and destroying pontoons and stores, until finally the last group of the unit left Suvla at 2 a.m. on the 18th of December. The naval bridging train's leader, Lieutenant Commander Leighton Bracegirdle, was awarded a mention in dispatches. He was proud of his men and the work they'd done. He wrote,
"These men, in most instances, had excellent training as apprentices to various trades in civil life, and, by reason of their years of training, both as senior naval cadets and as adult naval trainees, took pride in the fact that they were the only Australian naval unit serving in a European theatre of war. They were therefore bent on proving, both to the Royal Navy and the British Army, that they could overcome any difficulties."
Great to have those stories today, and the march, being a shorter one, is allowing us to bring you that great storytelling. So big thanks to our colleagues who've been preparing those stories about Anzac Day. Michelle, the commemorative service has begun, and it's a great scene here in Melbourne. And of course, the rest of the day, as you can see, the much smaller crowd here at Anzac Day commemorative service. But a lot of those people who were in the march have now moved on to, I guess, some watering holes
Establishments?
and different places that they go to gather.
That's right. You can see there the Federation Guard representatives. They're using the old SLR, the L1A1, which, if you're as old as me, you remember training on that at recruit course. Great weapon right from Vietnam right through, and it's a ceremonial weapon now. The Federation Guard also have guns and drums, so they come as a full ceremonial unit, a precision drill team. And look at that, absolute, not a waver.
Outstanding. You can only admire how they've gone about today's proceedings, and let's take a look back now at some highlights of the day. Stirring pictures to start the day. Well, the march is about to begin, but let's cross now to Christian Silva, our reporter on the ground, who'll be speaking to diggers and dignitaries throughout the march, and first with the all-important weather forecast. Some highlights there, and just remembering how we started off this wonderful broadcast on your ABC. And the commemorative service well underway now, and plenty more happening throughout the day on Anzac Day. And Dennis, it's been such a different day, hasn't it? Such a scramble to get this all together, but I think it's been a success, notwithstanding people in the last couple of weeks being unsure of how it might all go ahead.
Very much so, Paul. I was at the Anzac Day planning last Wednesday night at Anzac House in Collins Street, and there would have been, I think, around about 74 odd fellows, ladies from the RSL who are participating in the organisation of it. And I must say that the RSL itself planned out marvellously well as the evening went on to show the various areas where the formations would be coming and the banners. And as you say, Paul, it was pretty hard to sort of spot the various ones as they were combined in together in most areas. But yeah, overall, I think a great day.
Dennis, thank you very much to you. Thanks, Chris. Congratulations on the RAAF's 100 years. We appreciate your contribution again. Good luck with catching up with friends today. And Michelle, thank you very much to you for giving us special comments once again.
Thanks, Speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks to the broader ABC crew for putting on this broadcast, and we appreciate your time in sitting down and sharing another special memory of a wonderful day on the Australian calendar. Goodbye.